It of 1,000. Okay, hit record, hit record. All right, then I'll shorten this. Um, okay, I guess just shorten this. I'm putting it in the chat, but I have to shorten it to do it. All right, there we go. 117, one, all right, fifth, all right, six, Tu B'Shvat and Purim. Oh, okay. After we do Tu B'Shvat and Purim, we will have at the synagogue the Tu B'Shvat um, program. It will be on a Friday night. So I'm putting down that you should attend that. That was in the email. All that was in the email. All right. There we go. Okay, Pesach and Shavuot. Oh, it's very small because it's okay. Then on February 18, we begin looking at the modern period, which is pretty difficult to cover in one session. Then we'll have one session on the 19th session is the 25th of February. Um, let's see if I got it. No, it's still too many words. Hang on. Student presentation. All right, there it is. Okay, now I got it. There it is. So you guys know, so plan ahead. The one session that I think, well, the weather will hopefully improve. One session we will try to do together will be the Israel session in February, and then of course the final class. Now, so what I want to talk about a little bit with you guys tonight is what would you like to do? What kind of things are you thinking about for your very short, very nice, very simple class presentations? Um, um, let's see. Devin, is Jamie on too? He's still eating dinner. Okay, Jamie last year did an incredible presentation on the Holocaust. And they're back for another round with this class. So maybe we will prevail upon her to show some of that. So while we're waiting for, I think this is everybody. I don't see Debbie, and I don't see anybody else. That's Pablo, Darla. Do you want to open your camera and say hi, or are you just maybe eating dinner? It's okay. This is like a webinar. Yes. There they are. Okay. Look at that. Is that a Jewish looking guy? Is that this guy with his yarmulke? I told them they could go to Israel and pass, go to any synagogue and yeah, but be careful. You go to Israel, some guy's gonna grab you at the Western Wall and say, will you put on tefillin? You know, that'll be the real acid test. All right, you want to say a couple of words about you guys? Just
Everyone, we're Pablo and Darla. We're from we live in Alachua, Florida. Um, and yeah, that's pretty much all I have.
all right. So, and it's 7 here. It's 9 o'clock their time. So okay. I'm going to go ahead and start. But go to the chat and well, or just send it on email. Go to the chat and download all the articles, their PDFs that are there. And Pablo, I think, Darla, you guys already got it. Sam and Emily probably already got it with me yesterday. But I want to show you guys uh, uh, before we do the serious movie. You remember that I like, and I've been telling you about a group from Israel, a comedy group of 5 guys um, called "The Jews Are Coming." Like the Russians are coming, the Jews are coming. So HaYehudim Ba'im. This is, of course, a tragic period, and they have done. After October 7th happened, they did a very serious presentation. But here is, if I can find it. No, I got to open it. Here is their take on the the Spanish Inquisition. So bear in mind, it's meant to be funny, it's there he is. Okay. The scenario, and it's got translation is there. I know, don't worry about all this other crap. The YouTube does that, looking at all these other things that I couldn't see. So a family is having Purim, not Passover, and so the boy who's the actor is was, you may recognize him. He was in Adam Sandler's film movie You Don't Mess with the Zohan. He's a very well-known comedian in Israel. Anyway, so the boy is dressed up as Queen Esther. So it's supposed to be funny. All right. So anyway, I'm just going to jump right in and show you the.
היהדות יצאה מחוץ לחוק בספרד.
Hang on, let's start it again.
במאה ה-15 היהדות יצאה מחוץ לחוק בספרד. חלק מהיהודים העדיפו להתנצר, אבל רק למראית עין. הם נשארו בספרד כאנוסים, והמשיכו לקיים מצוות בסתר.
Are you seeing it all right? Are you seeing the subtitles?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So they're singing a song for Purim that we all know, but they're doing it silently because they don't want to be caught by the Inquisition. Notice that the boy is dressed up as Esther. The mother is dressed up like a witch. This guy on the left is dressed up like a devil. And father is dressed up, we don't know, but Mooney is the actor's name. He's sort of like supposed to be the Inquisitors. So they're hiding, of course, but they're still celebrating Purim. And they got a big grogger on the table, which they can't play because that's too noisy. Okay. Taking out the presents. Everybody gets presents for Purim, remember? It's an onion. They're so poor, that's all they can afford is an onion.
מי זה?
משפחת טולדנו, הזמנתם אותנו לפורים.
אני שונא אותה.
למה הזמנת אותה?
סתם, זה אינקוויזיציה.
It's the Inquisition. Oh,
מולובה. זה לא נכון. אני מתנצל, אנחנו לא התכוונו להפריע לכם באמצע חגיגות הפורים. פורים? מה פתאום? אנחנו נכנסנו חוגגים פורים. כן? אז למה אתם מחופשים? אני לא מחופשת. אני באמת מחשבה.
I'm really a witch.
עוד איזה.
ואתה? אני באמת שטן. והילד? אני מתקדשת.
הילד האכזבה גדולה.
אז אני מניח שאתה באמת אינקוויזיטור.
מה לעשות? זה העבודה שלי.
אז אם אתה אינקוויזיטור, אתה בוודאי מכיר את לחיצת היד הסודית שלנו. זה בסדר, חבר'ה, הוא משלנו. טוב, אז אני יכול להיות בטוח שאף אחד כאן הוא לא יהודי ואף אחד הוא לא מחופש. זה חבל. זה חבל מאוד מאוד, כיוון שאנחנו בכלל לא אינקוויזיציה, אנחנו יהודים מחופשים! סתם, אנחנו באמת אינקוויזיציה. אהה! עבדנו עליכם! אני בדקתי אותם. הם לא יהודים. חוץ מהילד. הייתה לי הרגשה. לופה, קח את הילד. לופה.
What did I do? What did I do?
תודה. תודה לאבא.
All right. Now, obviously, I don't know if you look them up. Look them up. The Jews are coming, and there's about. Oh, oops! I'm sorry. Gotta shut it off.
שלל סמכויות בתחומים כגון נישואין, גירושים, מתן תעודות כשרות, ועיון.
Okay, so about half of their, maybe about a third of their shows are available in with translation. All right, so anybody else coming on? No? Okay. So I'm going to shut off my AOL. And how many of you, be honest, were able in a very short time, were able or have been watching the various chapters of the history film?
I watched them. I just watched the Middle Ages one
You watched the
today.
Middle Ages already?
Yep.
Okay. And Pablo and Darla, all right. So you already did. Sam, Emily, I want to do a little bit of it then, just so they showed you at the beginning and again, this is always actors, not well-known actors. And I haven't forced you to watch the movies, but by watching them, you get a little bit of better picture of things. The Middle Ages or the medieval period is sometimes, are we recording, Steph? Yes? Stephanie?
Yeah,
I think she is.
recording.
Yeah.
I
I got a notification.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, officially beginning. And if there's people missing, too bad. Let people know, and I'm going to let Josh and Mary know because they're really big. Josh used to do some Kabbalah stuff, and I know that Jamie's really big into this. Invite people that you know, not just anybody, to come next week, and I will let the synagogue know too. I have a whole or what do you call it, whole PowerPoint on that material. And my friend Pablo here got interested in Judaism because he started reading up on Kabbalah. All right, so here's my open pitch. The Middle Ages for Jews and for everybody, we all stereotype it as this horrible time. People, ate on the floor, and there were rats everywhere, and the plague, and for Jews, persecutions. They killed us here. They persecuted us there. They forced us to convert here. They ran away. We moved there. And yes, that's true. But it's also a time when the major books of Jewish faith are being written, and Jewish laws are being disseminated. Remember what I said in our previous class? The biblical period, okay, we've got biblical laws and rules and sacrificial cult, which is no longer there. And then the rabbinic period, a group of people are writing and just talking among themselves, the rabbis or the Pharisees. But remember, they don't have a printing press. They don't have an internet. How does this stuff get out there? So it begins to be disseminated during the Middle Ages. And because there wasn't a printing press until the 1500s, late 1500s, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Because of that, there was a tendency to preserve the texts in, manuscript form. So if you had a copy of the Talmud or collections, that's great. Okay, so what is happening is the prayer books are being written. The Passover Seder is being developed. Kabbalah is being developed. And I'll get to Rambam in a minute. Do you remember that there was this guy? This is a repeat for you, Pablo, but I think, it's good to have it twice. Um, and also Sam and Emily to some extent, but just ask questions and stop me if you want. But basically, remember, we talked about this Rabbi Judah the Prince, or Yehuda HaNasi. He was called Prince. He was not royal, but he was just a very learned man. And he was the guy who took all these little oral traditions of the various academies and wrote them down, and then he collected them, and that is what we call the Mishnah. Then he moves, and everybody moves, or a large group of rabbis move to Babylonia, to Baghdad, and areas nearby, and they continue to learn and discuss, and that becomes the Talmud. Fine, but if you don't own a Talmud, or you don't know a rabbi, where you're going to go to learn the laws. So that's what happens in the Middle Ages. The Jews, the Muslims, and the Christians are all kind of obsessed with, gotta write it down. What's kosher, what's not. I don't mean that literally. What is acceptable to be a Jew, to be a Muslim, to be a Christian, and what the heck? They excommunicated Galileo, remember? Right? Because Galileo said, oh no, the sun doesn't go around the moon, the sun doesn't go around the earth goes around the sun. I mean, that was part of the whole Christian belief, or the belief of its time. All right, so if you remember I would love to show part of the movie, maybe I will. The scene at the beginning of that movie where there is this Rabbi Colonimus migrating by invitation up into what's going to become Germany, France, Germany. Okay, so that is the beginnings of what we call Ashkenazi Jews, the German background Jews. But before that time, this is groups of people from Rome, Jews who had moved to Rome. So there were three distinct movements eventually leading to the three groups of Jews that we have today. The ones who moved to Babylonia and then from there to other Arabic countries were called, or today we call them Mizrahi, which means Oriental or Eastern. And there are people, I had a professor in rabbinical school who was born in Baghdad. That's our home. That's where they lived for 3,000 or 2,000 years. So Yemen, Morocco, Algeria, Jews who never left the Middle East, right? And those Jews are the ones who have moved to Israel, most of them. I mean, did you read the news that the Syrian government is inviting the Jews back? Isn't that nice? Would you go? Pretty scary. So a second group, as I said, moves to Rome in the same way that Vietnamese people or Chinese people moved here, Japanese people moved here. They moved to the conquering country, so to speak. So that's where Colonimus and his people were living. And the third group, which becomes known as Sephardim or Sephardic Jews, are people who migrated out along the North African area to Iberia, Spain and Portugal. So that's how we get these three distinct groups. And as a matter of fact, Emily, are you there, Em? You want to tell us what she's going to do an oral report on?
I want to do a report on different foods, like between different Jewish cultures.
But what I didn't tell you is you have to make some. You have to. But you can always.
I'll do my best.
You can go
Yeah.
to Noam and he'll make something for you. Some baklava. Okay. So another feature of this time, which is not pleasant, as you know, is we're being persecuted here. Let's go there. Or, and this is going to sound like a stereotype, the king or the duke or the the governing body is saying, oh, hey, we need some people who are good at commerce or people who are good at bookkeeping. Oh, well, I hear the Jews are good at that, so they were, but for a certain reason. Number one, they were literate, they could write and read. Number two, there were people who, let's say a Jew in Egypt could write in Hebrew to a Jew in Italy. They had that language in common. So it's the stereotype is not true, but it was what powered these areas. So, for example, Casimir the Great of Poland in the 13th century says the German Jews, or the Jews who wasn't quite called Germany yet, but the Rhine Valley Jews were suffering persecution, and the guilds didn't like that they were competing with them. So it's better to move. And so Casimir says, well, I'll take them. So all the, whole segment of the Jewish population of the Rhine area moved to Poland. What did they bring with them? Aside from their belongings, they brought with them the German language. And that German language becomes what we know as Yiddish. So Yiddish is Old German, written with Hebrew letters, and is an argot, or a slang. Not even a slang; it's an actual language. But they infuse with it Polish words, Russian words, depending where they lived. In the same way, my ancestors, my dad's side at least, the Jews of Spain, are speaking Ladino. Well, they're speaking Spanish, 15th century Spanish, and the words are pronounced slightly differently, mujer instead of mujer, words that are, have become obsolete somewhat. And they are kicked out of Spain in the 1492, 15th century, after the Inquisition and the expulsion, and they bring with them this language. So my relatives in Israel, who came from Turkey, my cousins, spoke among themselves. The mother and the father spoke this language. They also have another name for it. It's sometimes called Little Spanish, like that, Españolite. Or it has another name. Anyway, with a kind of a Spanish word for it. But Ladino is the term that's used today. There's also Judeo-Arabic, Judeo-Farsi. There's these dialects that the Jews picked up, that they continue to throw in words from the dominant culture and infuse it with Hebrew as well. Okay, so now we go back to the predominant slide for today. So are you okay if I don't show the video? Watch it. It's really worth watching, especially because of one thing that's, well, maybe I will show one thing here. I'll just set it up to do it. I'm not going to do it right now, but okay. Okay, yeah, we'll save that for a minute. Stop the share, and I have it set. Okay, so let's go with the PowerPoint for tonight's class. PowerPoint. All right, remember, we're talking about these 5 periods. This does not include number 5. Biblical, rabbinic, medieval, modern, contemporary, or postmodern. So, and every time we have something happen that's a crisis, I don't want to repeat myself, but I just, so the crisis in the biblical period is 586, the temple is destroyed, but they're giving it until 539 because that's when the temple was rebuilt by Ezra and Nehemiah. Second temple, or rabbinic, or Roman, Greco-Roman, from here to there. I usually say 400 to 400. They say 500 to 500, because 500 is when the Talmud is completed and when Rome finally goes down the tubes, right? Conquered by all those masses of hordes of people from the north. And so here is the medieval period, which is rather long. And why did they pick 1789? Any history buffs out there? Revolution. What revolution? The French Revolution. The French Revolution, not the American Revolution, but we'll see if we can get to that a little bit today. All right, so those are the years. What happens? We are living in two distinct locations. Think of it like north of the Mediterranean, south. So in the north, in Europe, we're under Christian domination, and it's from time to time it gets horrible. Sometimes it's not so bad. And so under Islamic rule, we have, I sent this to you anyway, but I'm just going through it. So Muhammad had a great vision. He thought he was going to create this new monotheism, taking the best of Judaism and the best of Christianity. I mean, my goodness, of course, he says, Jesus was a prophet. Abraham was a prophet. Why don't you accept my religion? And he wanted at first for Jerusalem to be the capital. Of course, it was under Muslim control, and that didn't work out well. Right? So he decides on Mecca as his capital. And in that period, they establish, again, if I use terms, they're just to give you something familiar to connect to. The Jim Crow laws of segregation in America. They didn't go out and kill blacks all the time, right? But you could segregation, you're a second-class citizen. So that the Pact of Omar established that the Jews and Christians even that lived in Islamic countries were considered the respected people of the book, but they could not own, they could own some things, but they couldn't be wealthy. They couldn't be better off than a Muslim. If a Muslim these are laws, I'm just saying it was always practice. If a Muslim is riding on a camel, you walk. If you build a synagogue, it has to be smaller and more humble than the mosque. Okay, also, there's a word you might want to know. I know this is repeating for some of you guys too, because you studied with me. A gaon, today, modern Hebrew, gaon means genius. Your kid is a gaon, right? But it meant at that time, they had to have a chief rabbi. Somebody asked me last week, are there popes? There's something similar to the popes in the Jewish faith. So the gaon was a learned rabbi who would stay in Babylonia, and they would be consulted on the laws. So you're in Spain or in Germany, you have to write to them to find out what to do. They also had a person called an exilarch or Reish Galuta, like the substitute king until we have a king again. So we're all going to be coming back to the Holy Land, just a matter of time. All right, doesn't happen. So this period for the Jews we're going to skip over that slide. For the Jews of Iberia, it is, okay, that's the best I can do. For the Jews of Iberia, it is called the Golden Age of Spain. It's not Golden Age, it's just meant that they were living under Muslim. Remember I said Muslims were not nice, but they were not violently killing the Jews unless there was a fundamentalist uprising, just like in Iran, right? Which happened a few years ago. So in 1039, there was, and the Almohades had an uprising, and that was what forced many of the Jews at that time to either convert or leave. This is before the Catholic business. So the northern Spain is Catholic and and Christian, and southern Spain is Moorish. So that's where the Jews were living. Okay, but for the Golden Age of Spain, up until this period, there were, and you may have heard of some of these people. Here is Maimonides. Okay, so Rambam. I know this is repeating again. What does the R mean? Rabbi. Okay, so I'm a Rambam. That's a lot of chutzpah. Well, Rabbi Moshe ben Mordechai. My dad was Mordecai, Max. So you can have fun making up your name. So the R is rabbi, the M is first name, the B is son of, and the M is his father's name. His Greek name, he's also known as Maimonides, which is the Greek way of saying son of Maimon. So there was Gersonides, there was Nachmanides, all these Greek names. By the way, my friend Herbert was on with me earlier. It turns out I didn't know this, maybe Pablo, did you know the EZ as Jimenez Fernandez meant son of Fernando. I did not know that. So, and I'm going to tell you a little bit later about the secret Jews. There were people who kept the name Jimenez. They are in some cases formerly from Jewish background. Isn't that weird? Rambam was fascinating. He lived from 1135 to 1204. His father was a great physician and a scholar too. He's covered in a little bit in the film as little Maimonides, little Rambam. He was the Sultan's doctor. That doesn't mean he dispensed pills. Back then, a doctor would say, "Oh, you need bed rest, drink liquids," sort of like amateur psychologists as well. So in his spare time, he wrote his memoirs. He said, "I work all day from sunup to sundown. Then I come home and I study, and I write." So he wrote Jewish text, but he wasn't full-time rabbi. He had a job. His job was physician. So he wrote, remember I said this a minute ago, Judah the Prince developed this organized what's the word I'm looking for? Compilation of the laws, the Mishnah. So, but it was still too big. And the Talmud was 28, 30 volumes. So Rambam took upon himself to write for him, a 6-volume compressed collection of all the Jewish laws. He has them all organized. Laws of sacrifice, which are not relevant, laws of charity, laws of gossiping and how you can maintain yourself in the world, ethical as well as ritual laws. So that was great. People liked it and it was available. Then he went off on a limb and he wrote another book. He was not a Kabbalist, but he was a great philosopher. And he wrote the Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed. And it was a sort of a philosophy book. And he wrote it in Arabic. And the rabbis of the time, they said, "Don't talk about this stuff. This is just too heavy," and they didn't excommunicate him, but they pretty much banned the book. So, and this is from some of the Mishnah Torah. I'm not going to do this right now. But one of the things that then happened is, let me stop the screen share for just a sec. Again, this constant, you're okay, you're doing fine, we're okay, we're going to we're live in peace, so the tolerance of the Muslims, and then the uprising. So the Almohades tried to force everybody to become Muslim. This is where some of the competition begins between the Christians and the Muslims. And what Rambam's family did, him with them, he moved to Morocco. So that's what people would do. And then eventually he moved to Egypt, where he dies. I mean, he died of natural life. And he continued writing in Egypt. Well, this is going to connect with what's happening later on. What would you do if a group comes along and they're not horrible, but then suddenly all these fundamentalists are up and say, "You got to become a Muslim." Okay, I'm a Muslim. So it was not, halachically you're not supposed to, but people did it to save their lives. Where do you think, we talked about this yesterday, the prayer that we do on Yom Kippur, the very solemn prayer in the evening of Yom Kippur, Kol nidrei ve'esarei, all the vows that I have taken in the past year, may I be absolved of them. Because literally, Jews would move to another, probably to Morocco, and where they were now free to practice their Judaism, so they would come back. But they said, wait, I took a vow. I have to, so they have to be absolved. So that's why it's sung with such sadness and solemnity, because that's the history of it. Okay, so when this, trend happened, it happened again during the Reconquista, as they call it. When I was a kid, we all learned about, where is it? I lost the slide now. Hang on. Oh, here it is down here. We all learned about Ferdinand and Isabella, right? Did I lose it? No, there it is. Okay. Screen share. You see it again? Okay. So Ferdinand and Isabella united North and South, and then they kicked out, this is the beginning of, they kicked out the Muslims and the Jews. So we all were kids. We went to elementary school. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And in Spain, you could not be a Jew. For a time, by the way, you could move to Portugal. But later on, the Inquisition came to Portugal too. So in the same way, that's why I mentioned the Arabic, the Muslim, the Jews who converted to Islam. In the same way, 1392, or in 1390, good year to remember, there were riots all over Spain brought on by this, now it's fundamentalist Catholicism. And Jews would go to their local bishop, and they, like that movie, they say, oh, I'm a Christian now, I'm a Christian now. So there are two terms you should know. The term that was always used throughout history was marrano. Marrano is unclear. It might mean pig. It might mean they call them that because you can't eat pig. It might mean it's something in Hebrew, two words, more anus, meaning a punished person. But the term that's now used by historians and Israelis is crypto Jews or anusim. So the anusim, this is what's also weird. I mentioned Jimenez before. So I was in Spain in 1992, went on a trip with a bunch of rabbis and other people, and I'm sitting on planes and speaking to people in Spanish, and I'm running into people, and I'm sorry if I repeat these stories. They're just great stories because some of you heard these yesterday because we did a couple of privates, but in people that live in Oklahoma or Alabama will say, oh, we have Chippewa in our family. Johnny Cash used to claim that. And it may be true because there are people who had Indian blood. So I would meet people and they would say, and they were Catholic. They were literally totally Spanish, people, Christians, but they would say, tenemos hangos de judío. And they were really proud of the fact that they could claim that they had this Jewish blood. Then there were other people who literally did, as you see in that movie, in a funny way, they really did hide their Jewishness. And that's when the Inquisition came about. Now, the Inquisition, I always thought, was only against Jews. It was against anybody who was suspect of being a heretic. Jews, Christians, various kinds of mystics. And so, and also, of course, it was used, as you probably know, in a very dishonest way, So, again, you can see a funny movie like the Monty Python movie or the History of the World Part 1 by Mel Brooks. It was horrible. There were people who were tortured to confess, and some of the inquisitors. That's why that movie is kind of cute. The comedy troupe. Some of the actual inquisitors were themselves former Jews. Okay, Torquemada was one of them. It does not cover it in this slide, but I have another slide that in the 1390s there was a group of people that approach King John. John is Juan, right? And the movie you might want to see, it's also available online, is called The Disputation, with British actors, of course. And so you can watch this movie, and in the movie, they kind of show the story. I mentioned the Idis, so Maimonides, and then Nachmanides, Moshe ben Nachman. They're not related. About 100 years later, or actually 200. So Nachmanides is a learned rabbi in Gerona, and he's called to the king. He says, we want to have a debate. We want to stage a debate between you and a Christian. Who did they pick as a Christian? Paolo Cristiani. Paolo Cristiani was a converted Jew, a Christian who had converted from, so he's the worst kind of guy. And so they set up this debate, and is Jesus divine? And then the rabbi responds. And is the Talmud evil? And the rabbi responds. Well, it becomes obvious after a while, how debates work. And there's people there. There's noblemen and common people. And after a while, it becomes obvious that Rabbi Nachmanides is winning the debate. I mean, I'm not going to say, but here's the point. If he wins the debate, he has to get out of town. So in the end, and this is covered in the film quite well, he doesn't get killed, but he's given notice to get out of Dodge because you embarrassed the Christian. Another thing that happened, which may or may not be covered in the video, in Paris, there was a huge disputation again, but here it was the Talmud. Oh, this evil book none of us understand. It's all sorts of witchcraft and mystical stuff. So they brought in a rabbi and they debated. And this case, the rabbi or the group of people it was obvious that they were going to lose, and they burned the Talmud in Paris. These are the kind of things that were happening. I haven't even gotten to the plague yet. Okay, so the movie, if you want to see it, is available on YouTube. Anybody see Lord of the Rings? Right? Christopher Lee, who's also a Dracula a lot of times. He's a very evil kind of guy. He doesn't play the bad guy in this case. He plays the king. And the guy who plays the Nachmanides is a well-known British. They're all talking with, hello, I am Nachmanides. But it's worth seeing because you get the idea. All right, let's go back to this stuff. So it's not all horrible. Some of it is positive. Okay, where were we? Oh, I lost the slide. Back to the share. Okay, so Rambam is writing. Other teachers are writing. It's not in this slide, but the man who wrote the Zohar, the main book of the Kabbalah, his name was Moses de Leon, 1290. And okay, here we go, Pablo. People said, or he said, it was written by Shimon Bar Yochai in the 2nd century. And then the Kabbalists, the real traditional Kabbalists say, no, it was given to Adam. It was given to Abraham. He's meanwhile talking to his own wife. This is, again, scholarship, saying, hey, honey, I'm working on this book. So I'm not saying he was a bad guy or dishonest. It was common practice to write something, and it was called pseudepigraphy. And you would write something and you say, this was channeled by, or it was written by somebody centuries ago, because that gave it more gravitas, more weight. So the Zohar is written in 1290. And as I said, this whole kind of period of, we'll cover this more next week, but I'll see if I can hit it. This whole idea of some amount of science and religion and philosophy. Remember, the Greek philosophies and traditions are being rediscovered really under the Muslims, and the Christians and the Jews also had access in these academies. Okay, then this horrible crashing of the the end of the golden age of Spain, first on the Muslims, then on the Catholics. All right, so I talked about Rambam. Let's go to this other major. The writings are very interesting, but I want to cover the people. So, as I mentioned, the Inquisition, the expulsion happens, and the elites go. The people who are very very wealthy go to Amsterdam, and that's where Baruch Spinoza ends up, who becomes kind of a heretic for the Jews. They later on excommunicated him. Joseph Caro was another great halachic teacher and leader. But what he did, he was part of the community. Let me show you the slide of that first. Come back to that. And this particular slideshow includes Kabbalah stuff. But I want to show you, and we'll use some of that next week. But I have my own PowerPoint on Kabbalah. So this ragtag group of expatriates ended up moving to Israel in the 16th century, 1500s, and some came from Turkey, and they migrated, and Jerusalem was just impossible. I mean, maybe you could live there very humbly, but so they went to Tzfat. In English, it's Safed. Safed is a beautiful hilltop town in north in the Galilee. Sam, didn't you say you were in Israel? Did you ever go to Safed? And so today, so it became an artist colony for a long time. And so you can go to Safed today, and you can see all these great artists. It's really kind of, I wouldn't call it a hippie town. It's not Berkeley, but it's very off the beaten track. But it's also a great tourist attraction. And in Tzfat, there are at least 5 synagogues that I know of, maybe more, that all claim to be the holiest place where this group met to worship. So they had, I'm going to come back to Cairo in a minute. So these are the people who gave us the Kabbalat Shabbat that we sing on Friday night, the Psalms, 7 Psalms to welcome Shabbat, and Shlomo Alkabetz wrote the Lachadodi that we sing. I always mention him because he and it was very typical. I didn't cover poetry, but it was very typical to somehow do an acrostic. And sometimes you did it with Yud Hey Vav Hey or Aleph Bet Gimel Dalid, or in his case, he put his name in there. The first verse begins with an Aleph, the second verse begins with a Lamed, and so on. So Alkabetz would say, oh no, I'm sorry, not the last name, first name, Shlomo. Shamor v'zachor, first verse is a Shin. Likrat Shabbat, second verse is a Lamed, so Shlomo. All right, anyway, this group of people, maybe about 30 families, men and women, all moved to Tzfat. And most of them are Sephardim. And among them is Joseph Caro, as I mentioned, and they become, as it were, the Kabbalists of a new order. Now, I'll do Kabbalah more next week, but some of the teachings of Kabbalah had already been disseminated in Spain, in Germany, among very, very select group. Isaac Luria is known as Ha'ari, the lion. Ari, his name, it's always an acronym, stands for the Ashkenazi Rabbi Yitzchak. Now, they recognized he's Ashkenazi, he's from Germany. He went as a young man and meditated, and maybe he, learned mystical stuff by himself, maybe just a lot of studying on an island near Egypt. So then he moves to Tzfat, and they instantly recognize him as, you are our leader. It's amazing. So they're Sephardim, he's Ashkenazi, but they recognize him as their leader. And I don't want to compare things, but a little bit like the Baal Shem Tov, founder of Hasidism, or Jesus, he doesn't write anything down. He just talks, and people listen. And so his main follower, one of his main followers, Moses Cordovero, wrote down. And so we know his writings from that period. And I'll do this more next week. One of the things he does that's new is he takes the earlier Kabbalistic teachings and says, and this is important, why did this horrible tragedy happen? You know, we had the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Israel was horrible, but what was for the Jews of Spain, we were living, you know, like a very nice life. What happened? Well, there were people, they didn't sit around and say, oh, it was a dispute between this group and that group, geopolitical. They said it's part of God's divine plan. So what Ari does, Isaac Luria, is he develops, it's called Lurianic Kabbalah. Lurianic Kabbalah takes the earlier teachings, and again, just a little taste of it. The world was created by Hashem with these vessels, which you see in the tree of life, but the vessels could not contain the light. Here Pablo's nodding his head because he says, I think he's talking my language. The vessels could not contain the divine light and they burst. And then the divinity went all throughout the world. And our task as Jews is to find those little sparks of holiness and bring them back. So when they did the greeting of the bride, they were doing it with that intention. Every act, a ritual act, becomes an intention that you are doing. And he also did coin the term, but he developed the term we use today, tikkun olam, healing the world. In other words, I light the candles, I do a little act, or I make a shidduch, or that's a match between two people. I do a good deed, a mitzvah, and something good happens in heaven. So, you know, that's a very basic principle of, right, Jamie? Jamie hung out with some of the various, I don't give it a name, but, you know, various New Age people talk about this. As below, so above. As above, so below. You do this, and it channels energy. So that was what Luria did.
Hermetic philosophy.
What's that?
It was a Hermetic philosophy.
It's Hermetic. Yes. Well, she used that same term. It's a little bit. That's why I want to talk about this next week. Hermetic is from Hermes. The Hermetic philosophy. The problem. Yes. The problem with Hermetic or New Age Kabbalah or pagan Kabbalah is it takes some of the same terms, but without Hashem, without God. You know, I have the power to do this. Here's this, you know, take this tarot card, or here's the astrology. Whereas the Jewish mystics would say, God put the stars in a plan, and it's you know, we have to remember that God is in charge, not the witch or the shaman. Okay, back to, so now I can cover Yosef Karo. So Yosef Karo lives in this community, and he maybe knowing a little bit about Rambam, but perhaps not. He also decides in the same way, I'm going to write a book that will be a collection of all the Jewish laws. So here is, I don't have a picture of him, Karo. Okay. So Karo, I got to hit the share screen again. Whoops. Let's try this again, screen share. I'm getting better at this. Let's try. So Yosef Karo, it was a book that I read on him, but that's not the one I wanted. I wanted this slide. He writes a book that he calls The Set Table. Okay. Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan is cable, Aruch is fixed, set. And he does it even differently than Rambam. He makes it very, you know, this is the law on this. But he does it for the Jews, the Spanish Jews. Okay, and we'll talk in a minute about the differences. Well, I'm going to watch the clock, 8 o'clock already. So he is writing this down. But what he is doing in the meantime, as I said, hi, puppy. What he's doing in the meantime is he is a mystic. And our stereotype of lawyers is, you know, they're all cut and dry. Every night he is meditating and praying and believes that he is being guided by a sage from the second century, perhaps, Judah the Prince or Yochanan ben Zakkai or somebody like that. And so he is a mystic and a legalist. Is that a trip? So later on, about 100 years later, the book was disseminated into Europe, and there was an Ashkenazi rabbi, Moses Isserles. So what I'm getting at is just repeat what I said before. I guess that's all on this slide, because otherwise we'll get into the Kabbalah stuff. What is happening is write it down, disseminate it, tell the story. This is what we do. This is how we do it. And Rambam, I'll go back to him for a minute. If you take a look at the Adon Olam on Friday night, or even better, the Yigdal, which is not common today. People don't sing the Yigdal anymore. They both are based on the idea that you should have, I mean, this is going to sound awfully Christian, but a doxology, right? This is what we believe. There is one God. God has no body. God has no body parts. God is immortal. God is forever. God is, was, will be. V'hu haya, v'hu haya, v'hu hoveh, v'hu yihye, v'tifara. So, and then it goes on, not in Adon Olam, but in Yigdal, it says, there is no prophet as great as Moses who spoke to God face to face. And then he ends principle number 13, which you may have heard of before. The 13th principle of Rambam is, I believe in the Messiah. And even though he may tarry, he will still come. And that song, that verse became the watchword of the Holocaust for many people. In other words, it became a song, which we'll see when we get to that period. And people sang that or said that as they were going to the gas chambers. It's all very strange how history keeps going like that. Okay, so Rambam's writing, Paro's writing, other people that are mentioned in the film and also in the, please read the writings, read Telushkin, because I'm just here to put it all together for you. Other really amazing people, another Moses Ibn Ezra, and Abraham Ibn Ezra. Abraham Ibn Ezra is more of a commentator on the Torah. I got in trouble with the folks from Denver. Not in trouble. They didn't like when I said this. Moses Ibn Ezra had a strong attraction to another man. It wasn't that uncommon. So they wrote poetry to each other. And it was common among Muslims as well. They had a wife and they also had a relationship. It's not clear whether it was actually a consummated relationship or just my beloved man, like David and Solomon. So this is like history that you don't know about.
David and Jonathan. David
What's
and
that?
Jonathan.
Like the David and Jonathan story. Yeah. But again, maybe it wasn't sexual. Maybe it was just, I tell guys, I love you. I have my friend Ami, my singing partner from San Francisco. Men should tell men as well, and women should tell women. By the way, homosexuality was it was they knew of it, but it was less common for a man to talk about it. Women did bisexual things, but I don't want to get into that. But there's a little things that, and I'm going to get to this women issue in a minute. There's little things we don't know that has been rediscovered by history. For example, you may have heard of this book, Rashi's Daughters. Rashi had 4 daughters, and one of them at least put on tefillin. So there were a lot of people who probably broke the mold that were not keeping the stereotypical kind of lifestyle, but because he had 4 daughters. Mordecai Kaplan had 3 daughters, or 4 daughters, I think, actually, the guy who founded the Reconstructionist movement. So there's a very interesting part of his scholarship today where they're trying to go back to discover what women were doing then, Okay, I'm back to some of this material. Now here's get to the nasties. So you may know of these, you may have heard of these things. So as I said, let's see, not that one. Yeah, okay, this is another not so good slide. The several times of persecution and horrible things that we have to cover. Let's see, I get this shared and read up on them and know about them and acknowledge them. It is why we have so much history of fear and persecution between the Jews and the Christians, and to some extent the Jews and the Muslims. Okay, so we have the rise of Islam, the Golden Age. Pope Urban II. This is in the History of the Jews movie. They show a scene of villages being attacked. So the Holy Wars, when I was a kid, most of us remember, oh, Robin Hood, King Richard the Lionhearted, let's go, the Crusades. The Crusades were declared to take back Jerusalem from the so-called Muslim infidels. So on their way through Europe, the Crusaders attacked Jewish populations. There were 3 villages, 3 towns. Now, fourth is Cologne. I don't know enough about Cologne. The ones I always heard was because they called them by this name, Speyer, Worms, and Mainz, the 3 holy cities of France and Germany. And in each place, there were horrible, it makes it like October 7th, rapes, pillaging, hacking off limbs, not even forcing people to convert. They didn't just kill them all. I don't like to do this, but sewing a cat inside of a person and the cat would claw its way out. So the Crusades really began the anti-Semitism that later on takes root. The second big thing is the bubonic plague. Again, it's horrible to think about it, but heck, Jews washed their hands. They didn't, excuse the expression, they didn't crap where they ate. They kept these things separate. You go over there, you don't go over here, and you wash your hands. You go to the mikveh. So it wasn't that they had a huge difference, but there was less likely to get the plague. So naturally, they were blamed for the plague. I didn't even cover the blood libel. That would be even worse. Maybe we'll do that next in 2 weeks. Oh, no, 2 weeks we're going to hit life cycle. So we'll take a break from history. So this all builds up to the expulsion, as I said. When I said I was in Spain, when you meet people in Spain, they sometimes will be very honest with you and say, Spain started to go downhill when we got rid of our Jews and our Muslims. All the business people are gone. Did I already cover the names? Yeah, a little bit. Jimenez. So a person could have been either A or B. They could have been actually a secret Jew, or it could have been that there was lost. Why does grandma have this candelabra and she keeps it in the basement? Why does grandpa have this book in Hebrew? But they've been Catholic for years. So people in El Salvador, Mexico, in New Mexico, there's a whole movement of people, and I'm not talking about people who want to become Jewish, but people who found out that their relatives 3 generations back were Jews. Okay, now we go back to, this is again not pretty pleasant. We go back to Europe, to the mainland. What is a ghetto? Maybe I should ask you guys, since I talk too much. What's a ghetto? What was a ghetto? Come on, Sam.
It was a place that they kept the Jews locked in.
Yes, it was literally a walled in city. I'm moving you guys around, so it had a wall around it. It was the Jewish neighborhood, and it was called ghetto because the term was applied to there. Put you guys in a different viewpoint. The term ghetto meant was an Italian word for the foundry or the iron works or some kind of metal shop. So it was an industrial area. So the first ghetto was established not in Germany, but in Italy, in Venice, in 1516. And the Jews, you could leave to go to work or whatever, and we were really, I don't want to overplay this, we're really second-class citizens persecuted. Who has a somebody said a message, so let's see what this. Oh, okay, Jessica. Oh, you'll see it on the video. By the way, but for Jessica,
Have a great night.
just so you know, Jessica, just for the sake of history, the term ghetto began to be applied in the 60s to talk about the economic ghetto of Black communities. It was, I don't remember who the name of the historian was. So today we say I'm from the ghetto or whatever, but it literally meant a walled-in city. Okay, God bless. I'll see you Friday night, perhaps. All right.
Okay.
All right. So you literally had to wear some kind of identifying clothing, badge, Jewish star, a round circle, or even a hat, a dunce cap. Remember whatever dunce caps came from, so they could recognize you. All right, we're heading to the home stretch. The Nazis, of course, brought back this institution, and we'll be discussing that when we hit the Holocaust. So, as I mentioned, again, I'm a student of history. In this constant persecution and moving from place to place, so things got to be so bad for the Jews of Poland that there was a group, you may have heard of there's an uprising in 1648 against the oh, wait, I got to do my pyramid. Picture a pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid are the uber rich people, the Elon Musks, or in the 50s, where the guy, his name was Vance Packard, who was a sociologist, and he said this is what American society looked like: ultra rich, managerial, middle class, working slugs, and then the really poor. Well, where do the Jews fit in the Middle Ages? So you could take that same model and say up at the top were the king and the nobles and the priests and the ministers and stuff, and then below that the Jews were just above the serfs. And sometimes, again, stereotypes notwithstanding, sometimes they were the people who had to run the estates of the Polish noblemen. And so you have a religious issue. The Poles were Catholic, and the Ukrainians, because Poland had part of Ukraine at this point, and so the Ukrainians and were Russian Orthodox. So first, they're poor, they're oppressed, and they're the serfs. And so there was a revolt against the Polish overlords, led by a guy named, and you can look him up, Bogdan. The spelling differs. Khmelnytsky, and anything that looks like Nikki is Nitsky, right? So Khmelnytsky was, if you go to Kyiv today in Ukraine, there's a huge statue of him. He was the Simon Bolivar, the liberator of his people, right? So they thought he was a great hero, but he killed thousands and thousands of Jews. So again, Crusades, plague, Khmelnytsky. So there's a book, if you ever hear of Isaac Bashevis Singer, read two books of his. One is called Satan in Gorey. The other is called, what's the other one? Oh, I can't remember it right now, and I want to draw that, but we'll get to him in Yiddish. So Satan in Gorey tells the story of that period. The Magician of Lublin is the other one, Magician of Lublin. The Magician of Lublin deals with Kabbalah and a woman who becomes a Jew and a man who kind of lives a very interesting life. But in Satan and Gorey, he covers a lot of that horrible time. So wait, so here it is, the most of the time, 1666, all kinds of people, if you're old enough to remember Y2K, oh, the whole world's going to go to pot, the internet's going to blow up, and people were freaking out. or today, people in some Christian churches will say, you know, the second coming or so. So the Muslim Christians and Jews all began calculating, when is the Messiah going to come? For the Jews, it was the Messiah. For the Christians, it was Jesus. Who knows what the Muslims thought? Maybe they were frightened about all these Jews and Christians. But in 1666, Shabtai Tzvi is declared the Messiah. Shabtai means born on the Sabbath. And it's a common name today to be called if you're born on the Shabbat. So Shabtai Tzvi is in Izmir or Smyrna today. My grandmother came from Izmir. And it was at that time a little fishing village. Now it's a kind of a port city in Western Turkey. And he has a very good press agent named Nathan of Gaza or Gaza. And Nathan of Gaza writes all these epistles, sends them all over Europe, that, you know, Shabtai Tzvi is the Messiah, the Messiah, the Messiah. By the way, there were others, just like in the Jesus time, there were others because people were hopeless. It was destitute. There were, you know, the life was hard. They were persecuted. So what happens after the Khmelnytsky uprising, and all these people are left with, you know, dead people and nothing, and their houses destroyed. So they begin hoping for the Messiah to come. And they get on the tops of their rooftops and they start, the Messiah is going to bring us, you know, they didn't have the internet then. So they were influenced by this belief. So Shabtai Tzvi presents himself to the Sultan of Turkey and says, I am the Jewish Messiah. Give us back the land of Israel. The Sultan says, well, if you're the Messiah, I can run you through with this sword and you will not die. You know, convert or I'll kill you. So he does. He converts to Islam. Whereupon a large group of Jews convert with him. So my grandmother knew people. They were called the Donmeh. They were not the spell check wants to turn it into donkey. Donmeh were they were legitimate Muslims, but they had been formerly Jews, and they were not really accepted by the Muslims, and they were certainly not accepted by the Jews. So they were people who practiced a kind of Islam, but they remembered, you know, we went along with the Messiah. 100 years later, and I was trying to remember this yesterday, 100 years later, in Germany, there was another guy named Jacob Frank, false Messiah. But what he did, which was rather gross, was there was a belief that the Messiah would come in the worst of times. So they began practicing kind of like Charlie Manson or Jim Jones. He had a cultish following, and they began practicing kind of not so nice sexuality. I won't say what, you know, just orgiastic stuff. So Jacob Frank had the same dilemma. A Christian bishop presented him, said, I will kill you unless you convert. Oh, I'm converting, sir. So a whole group of Jews converted with him, and they became known as the Frankists. Why am I telling you this? Because that's another reason why Kabbalah became kind of verboten. Because see what happens, you know, these false messiahs. So, okay, we got one more. So Shabtai Tzvi is the false messianic movement. I got pretty much all of it. I got time for questions. But I'll end with this idea. Hi, is that Leo?
Yeah, this is Leo.
Hi, Guy. How you doing?
Hi.
Say shalom.
Hello.
So
Hi, kids. Hi.
why?
Yeah.
What happened?
What happened? What happened was we survived.
Two.
We are the Jews. We are cool. We survived.
That's when I stand in. My arm went up my screen down and I fell.
Oh, now it's been taken over. Hi.
Sorry.
One of your kids is the Messiah. Did you know that? Of course, I'm being silly. I mean, not silly. Yeah, that is a thing that, by the way, you sometimes say that in a nice way. We're all the Messiah. we'll talk about messianic movements in the coming weeks. We are all bringing peace, as a new way of thinking. Okay, so to summarize this time, as I said, persecution, disputations, writing down, moving from place to place. But what brings it to an end? And we'll get to this. We have this week, next week we'll do Kabbalah and other stuff. Also Hasidism too, because it's, even though it's later 1700s or 1800s, it'll be kind of connecting. And then we'll do 2 weeks on Jewish life cycle, and then we'll do the modern period. What brings this to a close is, watching the clock, 2020. What happens is the beginnings of the Enlightenment and the beginnings of the rights of man, of the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Magna Carta, even, you could say. So once you have this idea in your head that I can move to another place, or I don't have to be a serf or all my, but you'll see that the Enlightenment also brought with it some difficulties. One of which, just going ahead a little bit, again, this is just parallel, not exactly. After the Civil War in America, with the Emancipation Proclamation and other things, there were Black senators and doctors and lawyers and people who took positions, and that scared the crap out of the bigots in the South, which is why the Jim Crow laws and that whole persecution, the Ku Klux Klan was during that period. So in the same way, what happened in Germany is we got all these Jews, they all coming out of the ghettos, they're getting accepted to universities and getting jobs, and they're building their synagogues. We don't want that. So the anti-Semitism of the modern period, which we'll get to, is much different from the anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish, or if you want to call it, the religious anti-Semitism. It's not the Jews killed Jesus or the Jews use Christian blood to make their matzah. It's rather the Jews are bad, period. There's something fundamentally wrong about them. And that same thing happened with American Blacks. They were trying to prove that, they're not intelligent. Look at the nose, look at the brain, but that's horrible stuff. All right, so the Middle Ages was horrible in many regards, but I know what I got. I didn't do. There's one more that I didn't show you. I got to show you this one more. The life and times of Gluckel of Hamelin. I sent this to you. Gluckel, which means her name means something like lucky. Isn't that interesting? So Gluckel is a woman of that time. I mentioned women, I said I was going to end, but we got just a minute. 17th century. So she's just on the verge of the modern period, 1691. She's born in Hamburg. She gets married to a man who has a good business. He dies, leaving her all his money. And then she remarries another man with also has money and doing pretty well. And it says here, the original manuscript is lost to history, but one of her sons made 2 copies that survived. And Bertha Pappenheim, who I read her books, translated her books from Old Yiddish into German. So what did she do? She wrote her own memoirs. It wasn't, people didn't write books, Yiddish later on. And you had stories like, what's the famous collection of the British guy? Anyway, so they had tales and stories, not Shakespeare, I'm talking about much earlier. So Gluckel begins to write her diaries in order that her children will have something to remember. It's sort of like, here's what I want you to do, what I want you to remember, how to be a good person. So, and she says she reminisces about an earlier time when life was happier than it was today. So she's quite well off, but she lives through a very difficult time. And so her books have been published as where is it? What is the name of the book? The final copy of the book is the Memoirs of Gluckl Hamlin. Here it is. And so it's been written and it's still available to find today. And so it's just amazing that with all these men writing, legal books and prayers and poetry, there was one woman who wrote something about her life. Kind of cool, huh? All right. Who's got some questions, some arguments, some debates? Pablo's got something probably because he's jonesing. He wants to get into the Kabbalah for next week.
I did have a question. Do women ever wrap tefillin nowadays?
Yes. Oh, I thought you were talking about then. Yes, absolutely. Just like everything else, I'm jumping ahead. The 70s, 80s brought the feminist movement, but as that was changing, not only were there the first woman rabbi, Sally Price, and other women rabbis, but in order to put on tefillin or puertalis, you already want to be a religious woman, right? So not a reform rabbi or reform woman probably wouldn't put on tefillin, but there are women I know who are either modern Orthodox or conservative. So the conservative movement, as an example, in a seminary in New York and in LA. When you go to that seminary, the men and the women, let me put it this way. If you're going to put on tefillin, you have to start doing it and keep doing it. You can't just say, I'm going to do it this week, I'm not going to do it next week. So men and women do that. Now, there is another movement, not a movement, literally, there's another tradition that some women have developed. Like I'm wearing this really cool Bukhari and yarmulke. Some women said, you know what, these leather straps are so masculine, and we're tying ourselves up. So some women have developed a kind of a fabric strap, and the tefillin are made out of fabric instead of leather, which is kind of cool. So this is more the 80s and 90s. I mean, we'll talk about that towards the end of the class. Things that have come back that were only done by Orthodox Jews, the mikveh, the ritual bath. Boston has one, LA has one. I mean, they have them we have it in Denver too, but I know women who go to the mikveh who are not Orthodox. I know men who go to the mikveh. So I would say mikveh, kosher, tefillin are coming back, and also a different kind of talit. So, the old stuff, it has a name, Hidur Mitzvah. Hidur Mitzvah means beautifying the mitzvah. So, but it kind of belongs in the beautifying. It means like making something artistic. So ketubas is another great example. You guys got married with a ketubah, right? But you wrote it yourselves. So the marriage document. So what's happened, good question, Taylor. What's happened is once you say we're equal, then you start to say, well, what will we do? Will we do the same thing the men do, or will we do something a little different? I was shocked myself, not shocked in a bad way, but my trips to Israel were back 40 years ago. And then last year and this summer I went, and Israel is changing. There are more women rabbis in Israel than ever before. And they're not all reformed. They're independent. Yeah, cool. Good. Who has another question? We talked about the whole polemics thing, the crisis, the arguments between the Christians and the Jews. I'll just leave you with this thought. And that's why I use this period thing. The arguments about you go to heaven, or you only go to heaven if you believe in Jesus, or you only go to heaven if you believe this, is so middle-aged, medieval, as to be almost laughable. It's not something that you need to that people talk about in the 40s or 50, well, 40 maybe. And when you meet people like that, I'm not talking about just only fundamentalist Christians, but even fundamentalist Jews, they are living in that mindset. That doesn't mean that we should all become Reformed Jews or New Age groovy hippies either. I'm just saying that the aura of the Middle Ages was you're wrong, I'm right. There's no middle ground. In the modern period is, well, we're right and they're right, but maybe they're right, maybe they're not right. And then in the 70s, 80s is this kind of we're all on a path to God. I'm not making it doesn't mean everything's relative. There's a right way to do things. But it is, that's why I say these periods affect our thinking. Cool. Who else has a comment? Well,
I had a
Taylor,
question.
but Taylor, also, you should start
Oh.
thinking, it's only you guys that are in the conversion program that have to do a kind of an essay, which I'll be sending, and a paper. It's fun if you want to do a paper. If Sam wants to do a paper, that's great. I mean, not paper, but a class presentation. Because you're bored with me. Why always me? Go ahead, Em.
I guess I'm curious as to like why do you think Maimonides is so popular like still today?
Fascinating question. I suppose because he wrote stuff. I mean, why is John Steinbeck still popular? That's the guy who wrote East of Eden and a lot of the no, anyway, or Hemingway, because Maimonides did a very good job of disseminating and compiling the laws. In some ways, even though I said the Shulchan Aruch was more organized, the Shulchan Aruch is pretty dry. This is how you do this. This is how you do that. Funerals, weddings, and so on. Whereas Maimonides, because he was a philosopher, I don't know. I never thought of it being that popular. You've read him or something? You found his stuff?
I Sam read something, but
Okay.
it just feels like everybody talks about him all the time. Like if anybody's gonna talk about
Also,
somebody, it's
because
Maimonides.
of that statute, because
Yeah.
once the Spaniards had kicked all the Jews out, they started to regret it. I said I went in 92. Do you know why? Because it was 400 years later. They wanted to get our business. They were so thrilled. Oh, please come back. We love you. And they tours and tour buses, and we're going into these places, and we're seeing, oh, this is a church, but you see over there's the bas relief, or there's the Hebrew writing. All that was your church. It was your synagogue before it was our church, and they were so proud of that. So anyway, I think that might be part of it, that Rambam became popular among the Spaniards. Maybe interesting.
Well, there was even that program, I think it ended a few years ago, where Spain was letting people back in for citizenship who had
I want to go. Yes, I think it's somebody's phone. I think it's harder to get into now, but Portugal is still doing it. But you have to be able to prove that you have a Sephardic background, which I do. I happen to speak Spanish and some Portuguese too. I've thought about it. You all know me by now. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I don't know whether I'm going to be, on the West Coast, the East Coast, or Israel, but we're going to stay in touch no matter what. All right. So next week, here I will send it to you now. This is my own PowerPoint on Kabbalah. It's not like it's got to be super secreted. Read if you want to find something easy, read Ted Falcon's chapter 5. Do I have it here? Okay, here it is. And it's not, we're not going to start floating away. And I might teach you a little basic meditation. No, I might teach you because look at a candle and see the wick and the flame. And because it's chapter 5, because it's that, we're also going to cover the Baal Shem Tov and early Hasidism. Yeah, he has that. He says, page 75, he quotes Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, meditating. So, but it would probably be hard is to look at the tree of life because it takes a lot of work. It's not just one lesson. Maybe I can convince Joshua to pop in for next week too. Okay, guys, are we out of time? We got a recording. Stephanie, you're still there? All right. Okay, what
Yeah,
time is it?
I'm still here.
Okay. Oh, well, everybody pray for Stephanie to feel better. One of the stories we'll tell, not this week, but in the modern period is, if you want to understand a little bit more again about why Kabbalah became so scary, there were people, did you ever hear the Dybbuk or the Golem? Right? The Golem was this clay monster, which is the basis for the Frankenstein story. And so the moral of some of them was you don't mess with Mother Nature, don't mess around with this stuff. You'll blow up. So
I think
all right. I will be leading services this Friday and next at our shul. And everybody send blessings to Steph and send blessings across the country to Pablo and Darla and the dogs and the kids. Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
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 Bye.